It started with, what would Laura Roslin do? Now we're asking, what would Sharon Raydor do? Welcome to the What Would Sharon Raydor Do podcast, where the woman who knows her best, Mary McDonnell, talks about Sharon's motivations, experiences, and thoughts as she goes through the season. I'm Mina Sharpe, editor of MajorCrimesTV.net, and I'm very happy to be here with Mary and our special guest this week, Olivia Jane Mell. Welcome, guys.
Hi.
Hello.
And also we have Chelsea with us, too, as usual. Say hi, Chelsea. Great. Happy Thanksgiving post. Yeah.
Absolutely. Just before we start, a warning that we'll be talking about Sanctuary City Part 5, so if you're not caught up with this week's episode, there are spoilers ahead. So,
first of all, anybody who hasn't caught up is already spoiled because of all the pictures all over the internet. And I just really want to start out talking about that, Mina, because I was so stunned by this. Now, we've gone through how many years of major crimes, and our dear TNT, like, sort of squeezing publicity out of them. And then suddenly, the wedding photos, which we didn't really want pre-release because we wanted the reveal of the bride with Greg Lavoie's genius dress.
Oh, yeah.
But suddenly they started appearing everywhere, and we got all kinds of publicity for this episode that started to build as the wedding episode. And we all got caught up in wedding fever, but in fact, it was another episode about a crime with a wedding at the end. And so it was like, wait a minute, we all got, eat me too. I was in the wedding. I read the script. Olivia was in the wedding.
Yep.
We know that the wedding itself was one page, I think, at the end of a 42-page script. And we're all very clear about that. But then TNT just went out there with it, and it became the wedding episode that we were all anticipating. And I remember even yesterday when I watched it, went, oh, right, that's just at the end of the episode. We have a big honking crime to solve first.
Well, maybe it was one of those things where it's like a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's something for people to hang on to and look forward to amidst, like, all of the crime, amidst this 5-episode arc of just, like, tragedy and hard things. So even though it was only, 2 minutes or something, it is the wedding episode because it's like the hope to cling to.
That's wonderful.
I don't know.
well, it was short, but we were treated to a beautiful, a really beautiful scene. Let's talk about Sharon's wedding dress a little more, because that was, we were hoping that was going to be a secret. It came out a little early, but it just meant we all got to just enjoy the beauty of that dress for several weeks leading up to it.
It's true. In retrospect, I thought, my gosh, that first reveal of Sharon in the church when the doors opened, which is such a beautiful shot. But if that had been the first time that we saw that wedding dress, this is the other way to look at it. And then we moved on from that shot very quickly. We'd be like, what? I want to look at the dress. Yeah. So instead, they had a chance. We all had a chance to look at the beautiful work that Greg did on that, and then perhaps that shot then became even more valuable to us. It's interesting. You don't really know. I mean, if we'd had a longer version of the wedding, there probably would have been moments where we'd be like, okay, let's get on with it. You know what I mean? Like you do at every wedding.
No one actually wants to sit through a whole wedding.
No, not really. And so it's hard to say. Did it pack more of a wallop because it was shorter? It may have. It may have.
Now, I do know a couple of the fans, I think, comparing it to when Sharon and Andy got engaged, it felt very similar in that we got up to that moment and then we got a little fade to black.
Yeah.
And in the wedding, we got this beautiful Sharon coming down the aisle and a little bit of the preparations. We got them to the altar and then we got a fade to black.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that and the difference between leaving it up to our imaginations to how the rest of that went versus, seeing it and having it be a little more finite?
I just think that that's entirely up to the writer. You know what I mean? Whether or not they want to go into more detail about any given relationship at any given moment. And I do know that there is frustration with that because people love Sharon and Andy so much they want to spend more time in the details of their relationship. But I think that for whatever reason, James, and who knows what any writer's reasons are, right? But for whatever reason, that isn't where he goes with this couple. And I think that because he doesn't, there's other things that he does do with them in a very short period of time. And because he's got the two right actors to do it with. I think that he feels, and if he was here, I could ask him, and I would, and maybe he'll come answer this sometime. But I think that he feels that relationship has its purpose inside a procedural crime story, and I think that he's gone further with it than he thought he ever could, to be very frank. And I think that has been both supported and fueled by the fans, and that he has been really happy to go as far as he's even gone. So I know that expectations make one think a certain way and what have you, but there is a whole other point of view here, is that a Sharon and Andy relationship was really not in the cards, and it has turned into an absolutely beautiful thing. And I think the fans could actually kind of see themselves, pat themselves a little bit on the back, rather than always looking at what they're not getting.
Right, right. I mean, the relationship did develop from a very adversarial to get to this point over many years.
And some of the conversations they have this season are really, really beautifully textured and interesting and deep. Right. And you don't always get that even when you have a show about a relationship that is what the show's about. You can have that for 6 years without getting some of this stuff that I've seen this season between them. So I understand people wanting more. I'm totally complimented by it. I know Tony is, we all are, even James is. But I also would be sort of take a look. One of the reasons you want so much more is that there's so much there already. And I think that needs to be celebrated. This is a crime procedural with a very mature, complicated relationship in it as part of a very big story. And the fact that we got that wedding at that level, to me, was absolutely fabulous. And also because it was the wedding of Sharon's faith. And because this season is about faith, and because this crime that she just finished was taking place inside her own church. It was heartbreaking for her. So to be able, at the end of that, to know that it wasn't the church, and to go ahead and continue to have her wedding there, that's, to me, part of what was so beautiful about it being at the end and being just that.
Olivia, we were treated very wonderfully to your song and singing in it. We had heard tidbits along the way that there was this amazing singer that Sharon loved that was going to be singing at the wedding. And we're very excited to find out it was going to be you. What was your experience like going in and having that day?
It was extremely special. I mean, it's not every day that a girl gets to sing at her own mother's wedding. I mean, it was sort of like a great homecoming for me, because I've spent so much time over the years around these people and the Major Crimes family, and I was treated like family on set. The day that we shot that scene was there was such joy in the room in that church, and such happiness, and it was like, the wedding was like reflected in reality, like life imitating art, and it was a joy for me to do it, and I was beyond honored to sing the song that I sang. James Duff gave me a great gift in that. The song was his choice, and I'm a huge Sondheim fan, so to be able to do that for this very special occasion was a great honor for me as a daughter, as an actress, as a singer, as a musical theater lover, and as a fan of the show. So it was like, it was great for me. I loved it. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff wrapped up into that one day.
That's so great.
Now, I heard there was kind of a funny story about the song and how that came about and everything.
Yeah, so most people who know that song, and the way I knew that song was, it's Stephen Sondheim, Not a Day Goes By, and it's from Merrily We Roll Along. Mm-hmm. And Bernadette Peters made it famous, obviously.
I Bernadette Peters sobbing her way through it on my playlist for a long time.
Yes. So what most people know of that song is the Act 1 version, because it goes backwards, chronologically in the show. And so the Act 1 version of the song is very negative and upsetting but beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
Because hasn't the marriage ended by then?
Yeah, well, yeah. So it's all about like when are you going to leave my head? Like death, and it's all about death and parting and sorrow, and so I listened to it, and I had forgotten, or I didn't know that there was this other version that was like the happy version and the celebratory version. So I was sent the song, and I would go, oh my God, Stephen Sondheim, this is so exciting. And then I watched the Bernadette Peters version, and I was like, wow, this is so beautiful, but she's singing about death. Like, did he send me the right thing?
And like, you came to me, remember?
And I came to you, and I said, well, no. Before I even went to you, I went to Andy Sachs, and I was like, one of the producers, and I was like, Andy, this song is so beautiful, but I just have a question. Have you listened to it? Have you seen the lyrics? And he was like, no, I haven't. Hang on, let me take a look. And then he comes back to me, and he's like, huh. You know what? Let me get back to you. He's like, well, this is what James wanted to do. And I was like, okay, great. Then I'll just go with it. It'll be great. I'll figure out a way to make it work. And then I brought it to you, and I was like, so the song I'm singing at your wedding is, interesting.
and then of course, she played it for me or showed it to me. I can't remember which. And my reaction, I took a bit of time, and I just was in my mind going, I've worked with James now for a very long time, and I do know that part of his creative gift is that he's counterintuitive to everyone else in the room. So I'm going, what's he up to here? Yeah. That I can give Olivia to act.
Right.
So that she can make this work.
And I was prepared to make it work. I was like, I have a whole list of stuff that I can work.
We were already like trying to second guess James's counterintuitive idea about why this would be a great wedding song. And then Patrick Duffy, the director, couldn't get past it. And finally went to James and said, I need you for a moment. And James said, what? And he goes, I don't know how to make this song work. And James said, what are you talking about? And so he said, this is a song, right? And he played it. And James goes, no, that's the wrong version. Wait a minute. Sit right there.
The Act 2 version.
He ran down the hall and came back with something and played the end of the musical, which is actually, you go back in time to when they were in love. And then the whole thing got straightened out. It was hilarious.
It was hilarious, and I have to say, such a relief.
Me too. Oh my God.
Because I was like, okay, I'm going to make it work. I'm going to figure it out. It's going to be great. We'll figure it out. We will justify it.
Yep.
I will find 1,000 ways to justify it because I am a professional. and then it was like, oh, no, that's the wrong one. Here's the version. And then I saw the lyrics, and I went, oh, thank God.
I know. And Olivia kept saying, I can make this work, Mom, but I'm concerned about Sharon Raydor. Because how does she walk down the aisle to this? It's like, what? You remember?
Yeah.
It was so funny.
I was just concerned for Sharon. But Yes, so the version that you heard
And poor
and
James
saw,
was then like, how could any of you think that I would want? Oh my
and
God.
we were all like, well,
The whole thing was hilarious
know.
and loving and funny.
oh,
Yeah.
it was a wonderful, wonderful mistake,
I know.
misunderstanding.
Andy was the funniest.
Andy was
Huh.
hilarious.
Huh. I'll get
well-
back to you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you figured it out before you had to do too much prep on the other version.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, so the version that you heard is the second act version, and it's very hopeful and beautiful, and it's still the same, the same melody. So it was an honor to do it. And, it's not every day, like I said, it's not every day a girl gets to sing at her own mother's wedding, but it is also not every day that an actress gets to sing such material, and that a singer gets the privilege of being paid to sing that material, let alone
Absolutely.
sing it in general, So I was beyond honored to do.
And I just want to say one more thing too about that day, and it's a little bit of I would say this even if Olivia wasn't my daughter, and Karen would back me up, because one of the things that Karen and I got such a kick out of is that so Olivia did this beautiful recording of it before we shot. So, because they didn't want to make her sing all day, right? And although she could have pulled it off, but most couldn't. So she had done this beautiful recording, but Olivia is such an amazing visual actress that all 200 people in the audience thought she was singing it live every time.
When I was lip syncing?
When she was lip syncing. And then all of a sudden, at the very end of the day, when we'd been shooting for 12 hours and people were ready to go home, they said, no, you got to wait. We now have to record Olivia live. And the people in the audience were going, that wasn't live the whole day. And so now, Karen, who's, as we all know, extraordinary singer, is now like, oh, poor Olivia. She has been here all day lip syncing, and now they're making her sing live. And they bring 3 cameras up, and, she goes right to close up. So Olivia sings it. And in her mind, she's going, okay, that was good. And so, no. And then it was,
assuming,
boom, cut, you nailed it. One
Nice.
take, live. And
yeah, I was like,
audience,
oh, that was my warm up. Okay. Now we're going to do it for real. And he's like, we got it. I was like, wait, what?
I know. And the audience went berserk because they couldn't tell the difference between this perfectly edited a version in the studio and what she did live. So it was a great compliment to you as a professional. That's all I'm saying. Anyway.
Very cool. Mary, what was it like for you walking down that aisle? I mean, in that moment, are you thinking, I am Mary playing Sharon, or are you inhabiting the character and just having that beautiful moment?
Well, I always have a hard time distinguishing myself, as we've talked about, between my characters anyway. So it's always a little bit of both of us. But what I got a real kick out of afterwards is I realized how emotional it was for me, because as quite often with Sharon Raydor, my latent Catholicism blossoms in these unexpected moments. So in a sense, you could say that Sharon had the wedding Mary didn't have. Although my wedding was amazing, but I was not at the point in my life where I was going to have a Catholic wedding with a priest, in that kind of gown with Ave Maria in the background. I mean,
in a church.
In a church. I mean, no. I had an excommunicated priest who came down to my sister's garden. You know what I mean?
The backyard wedding was gorgeous.
Do you know what I'm saying? So it's sort of like, and because he was a progressive activist at the time, and he was an AIDS activist, and he lost his, whatever. So in a way, I got to experience the part of me that had been unexpressed in that moment. The fact that Olivia was there made it seem oddly more real, even though the math is impossible. You know what I mean? It's sort of like this should sort of disturb the equation. How could I have a daughter standing there saying, you know what I mean? But somehow it just fed more into what we all felt. You're right. That day was a sense of family and reality, and everybody was emotional. Every single person got emotional that day. And Patrick Duffy, who's one of our favorite guest directors, came in and brought a sensitivity and kindness and beauty to the whole episode. I thought it was one of our best. But he really nailed the wedding. And he got it all done in one day. And that's all we had. Do you know what I mean? So he really deserves tremendous credit for the grace implicit in that. Because that's what I saw when I saw it yesterday. That was a graceful 2.5 minutes. And it felt full of grace. And that's the point of any kind of religious ritual. That is the whole point, is to feel whatever grace means in the air. And we did. And it showed up.
And that, as a viewer, that emotion came through in those moments.
Yeah.
And really made it seem like it was this beautiful culmination of a relationship that has taken all these years.
Right.
So that came through, and it was very impactful in that way.
And just to go back to the song for a minute, it was really smart on James's part to choose that song knowing Olivia's voice, which he does. He knew that would be a perfect blend, match, and it was. But also the song itself had a melancholy in it that I thought worked so beautifully. In the world of major crimes, in where we are in the storyline, there was an implicit melancholy in the wedding song. And I do think that surrendering to marriage has some melancholy in it. We often skip over it like it's all happy, happy. Right. I don't think it is all happy, happy. Once again, the woman is making a choice to say, I'm going to put yet another person before myself, in a way. Because when you make those wedding vows, which we didn't get to hear, but I'm sure they were pretty traditional in some sense, till death do us part, you become my priority, and I become yours. That's a different kind of giving up of one's selfhood. It just is, and there's melancholy in it. I don't care if you're 18 or I'm not going to say how old Sharon is because nobody knows. And no one will ever know. You know what I mean? And I know. And so I think that choice of song was really kind of something.
It was very special, yeah.
On that note, so we had a few fans write in with questions, and one that kept coming up was, there's a bit of a trope in the world, really, of this idea that women must be married to be happy. And, we've seen Sharon over many years be an incredibly strong, successful, independent woman. And as we're happy for her getting married, I wondered what your thoughts about sort of the cultural, pressure of marriage versus this woman, and what drove Sharon to want to take this step at this point.
Well, I remember at the beginning of all of this relationship that I remember talking to some fans about it. I think we even touched on this early on. And I remember what I know about Sharon is that marriage really did not interest her. It was the last thing that she needed after her first one, and after successfully emerging from her first one, holding that family together, having the career she wants. Her life was just fine. That was a cool looking condo. You know what I mean? I mean, there was not a problem. So this Andy thing kind of crept up on her, but marriage was not where she was going in her head. She didn't even know she wanted to live with another human being. You know what I mean? Rusty was fine. Rusty's in his corner, she's in hers. Right. They cohabitate.
And even Rusty was an adjustment right in the beginning. Big adjustment.
For sure. Look at her life. It was like all under her control, and she'd been through a lot. So no, marriage was not her goal. And I think she really did resist the relationship and everything about that blending once again. But somewhere along the way, I think that Sharon decided, or just naturally did, start leaning into the risk inherent in marriage rather than the protection in staying alone. And that for her to be married to Andy was a much greater risk for the likes of Sharon Raydor than for her. What?
Nothing.
What'd you do?
I didn't do anything.
What'd you do?
No, I was
You like that idea?
tapping my nose and
Yeah.
contemplating what you were saying because it's, I think it's right on.
Oh, good. Oh, that's so good.
Very useful piece of
Information. Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I think that's really what happened is that she perhaps became more morally compelled to take the risk because there was no doubt about the love, then hold back on the risk because it was more comfortable to be alone. And I definitely felt that in the wedding. I felt like, oh my God, she's losing her cookies inside because this is a huge leap for her. I even loved the last, I know it was short. I know we all want like an hour of that, including me. It was too beautiful. But the very last shot of Sharon, I really admired James coming out on that because she did have a moment where that was all clear to me that this was a huge risk. There was nothing about an exciting one, but a big deal. And you saw it a little bit in the week before. The intimacy, that's what it is. The emotional intimacy that a marriage creates the possibility for was scarier for her at the beginning than being alone. So that's where we are
So
now.
a bit of a leap of faith as well for her.
Oh
and a
my
nice
God, huge
tie-in to
And she's a
where it
person
is.
who likes control
Yes.
and order. So these marriages are messy. I mean, if there's one thing that's true about every marriage, whether it's good or it's bad, is they're messy. You get yourself mixed up with another person in so many deep ways that you can lose your way. You can. And so it requires great trust. It's an amazing institution, actually.
So I want to talk about somewhat, like you were saying, the song has a melancholy in it. We've had a little bit of melancholy more so this season because of this kind of bittersweet. As excited we are about the wedding, there was some news that Sharon got last week in this terms of this heart condition that she has that is concerning. And I think we're all a little concerned about where that could go. I mean, in terms of the diagnosis, do you think did Sharon feel like maybe something was wrong before she went in? Or is this catching her very blindsided?
No, it caught her blindsided. She wasn't really hiding anything, faking anything. She just started losing it. And she did have the flu, and she couldn't recover. And no, this was not anything that she saw coming,
right,
at all. And frankly, at this point in the story too, as much as it scares her this way or that way, because she'd be a fool to not, you don't get a diagnosis of cardiomyopathy and not have fear. But there's a whole other part of Sharon Raydor that's like, this is just a matter of figuring out how many appointments I have to get through.
Right.
And we'll be done with this one. So there's both of those things running in her right now, which I'm fine. I found, because we're finished shooting season 6, I found very compelling and engaging to deal with as an actress. It was really rewarding.
I mean, I think we've seen Sharon compartmentalize so much of her life. This is the home life, this life, and we see her a little bit, I think, doing that, in these last 2 episodes. She gets a diagnosis, she goes back to work. But then we're also seeing, she had that beautiful moment with Andy last week, where she tried to call off the wedding in terms of this. And then this week we saw her really have an emotional moment with that priest. And that really seems to be showing a different side to Sharon than we've ever seen before.
Well, yeah, because she's been blindsided with her own mortality. And so luckily, this particular writer, as opposed to another writer, or another, not one in particular, another writer, has decided to explore the finer points of that vulnerability to mortality, as opposed to what it could be, which is that it's a lot about doctor's appointments. What I saw in the writing was it's a lot about leaning into what is your moral fiber, what is your belief, what is your faith, what is your trust in life, and how does that influence how you're functioning. So it's coming up against, the illness is coming up against and revealing more of Sharon Raydor's moral code. And that is good writing, in my opinion. You know, whether or not you want Sharon to be sick, it's good writing. I've seen a lot of people sick on television. I've been a lot of people sick on television. Several times, you know what I mean? And these finer points were not necessarily ever discussed. And I'm very pleased with some of that. Yeah.
Did you feel like Sharon getting this diagnosis in the middle of this case changed how she approached it and how she dealt with these boys or any of the things that she was dealing with?
No, I don't think so. Not in this episode. I mean, it may have influenced her because it would influence everything, but not consciously. I think for her, the boys, that the thing that drove her, I think, in this whole situation was the potential hypocrisy of the church. That would have blown her mind. You know what I mean? And so it was the navigation of that. That was really driving her in this, is to make sure to take that to its, and it was a great relief that in fact, but she would have just nailed them if she had to. That would have been a whole other crisis for her. Right. Do you know what I mean? But I'm not sure. I'm sure the diagnosis was influencing the way she dealt with it, but not consciously to her.
Okay.
Right.
Olivia, I want to go back to you. So you've done a lot of live concerts. You've done some wonderful live concerts. We had one at Kamapalooza this year, and you've performed around LA. And then you've recently recorded a CD. How was this experience singing on TV on Major Crimes different than those other kind of experiences singing? Like, how is it different? What do you have to do differently to
Oh, that's a great
perform?
question. Well, I think for this, for shooting Major Crimes and singing in this scene, I was grateful for my background in musical theater because it came very natural to me. It's a very different part of my performing brain than getting up, like at Molly Malone's and singing a rock show and singing my own material with a full band behind me. And it's like, it's a very different energy. But I started in musical theater and I fell in love with Sondheim at a younger age. And so doing this was sort of going back to my roots. And
freshman year.
Right. Yeah. So,
Into the Woods.
Oh, that was sophomore year actually. Oh. But yes, sophomore year of college. I was the first time I did Sondheim. I was Cinderella and Into the Woods. But I will say that there is a similar part of the two sides of that, and that is a connection to what you're singing about. It's very important whether you're in a rock show or in a musical or singing a lullaby to your kid at night. Like, it's all about connection. For me, that's why I sing. So I had a backstory. I had my Olivia's connection to Mary. And I had my character, my wedding singer's connection to Sharon. That girl you liked.
Yeah.
But I, of course, I expanded on that in my mind a little bit and talked to Patrick Duffy about it. And so and I do the same thing, when I'm in a rock show, I when I'm singing my own material, like words that I've written, it's very easy to connect. And when I can see the people in my audience, if I know someone that's out there, I sing to them and I can sense what is happening to some extent. And so doing this was like, I knew what I was supposed to do, but I was also feeding off the energy in the room. And that was influencing how I was performing it. And it worked out, I guess.
Yeah, I'll say. That's great.
Hey guys, Chelsea here.
Yay, Chelsea!
Yay. I personally had a few questions, so I'm going to take over for Mina for a minute. So through basically the last time we did a podcast was before the season even started airing.
Right.
So we have 5 episodes. We have an actual arc, which is really cool to kind of put it all together as a whole.
Right.
So far we've seen so much going on with Sharon. So much, she's dealing with the church. She's dealing with the FBI. She's dealing with these different institutions that she has to navigate within. And we start seeing a lot more of her moral character, but also how she functions within the world.
Yeah.
Can you maybe touch on like how she dealt with the priests specifically?
Yeah, it is kind of interesting, Chelsea, to bring that up because there is a difference in this arc. We've not seen Sharon Raydor take on the institutions she has heretofore respected. She's in this arc, she takes those institutions on, head on. And life has forced her into it, perhaps. But she does it with absolute fearlessness in both the case of the FBI. She's usually the one that's calming Provenza, etc. down and saying, don't be too tough on them. We have to work with them. And there is something in this arc that was crafted beautifully towards this event, that 2 events. One is she has a health crisis, and second is she gets married, which most people would say is honoring an institution. With Sharon, it's like the biggest risk she could take. The whole thing is opening her up more to the expediency and the truth of the moment, whatever that is. And being able to be willing to be excommunicated, which would break her heart on some level. That was going to cost her a great deal. But she would do it because it's wrong what they were doing. Gladly. She would have taken that all the way to the top. She'd go all the way to Rome. And yet it would have been a painful reckoning. She's had a great deal of respect for institutions. The justice system being the first one that she admires more than most people. So you did see a different kind of Sharon. You saw Sharon who was much more in the moment of, I'm going to take chances here, and I'm going to take a chance here, I'm going to take a chance here. And in all these cases, it brought a tremendous fear and questions about her own faith. Faith in what? Faith in who? Because when our icons of our faith start to crumble, and we haven't really thought about what our energy, the energy of faith is, or if we're not sure that it isn't really about the icon at the end of the tunnel, it's really about our relationship to life, and life being a bigger event than we are. If you don't have that when the shit hits the fan, as it has done for her, even the wedding is some sort of shit hitting the fan for Sharon Raydor to go through that again. And this has nothing to do with the miraculous Andy Flynn. He is a miracle. No, he's a miracle in her life because she would never get married to anybody else. There would be no wedding, none whatsoever. And I have to kind of say, I have to say that Andy Flynn is played by Tony Dennison. Made this happen. You know what I mean? Because Andy Flynn could be played a lot of different ways. But nobody with that charm that Tony brings to that role that could get through to a woman who is committed to control, there's this guy smiling at her. It's just uncanny what Tony can do to you.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Oh, well,
Flynn
let's ask the
girls,
Flynn
hope you're tuning
girls.
in.
Oh, Shandy shippers. Let's go. We're rocking out now. So, yeah, I think back to your question, I can't get away from the wedding. But anyway, back to your question about the arc. Yes, it's a good one. It's a new, the writing compelled Sharon to reveal more about what she's willing to risk in every area in these 5.
And I especially love the scene where she, Sharon's worked with so many different teams across the board within the LAPD and within so many different things. But I loved seeing her with the FBI.
Yeah.
And they've worked together before.
Yeah.
And she's so used to, we're just going to go around the rules and be sneaky and still make it happen. But she went in, and it looks like she lost control, but was so controlled in, how she was dealing with them, if that makes sense. It was amazing to see that kind of anger almost come out of her.
Oh, yeah, she was furious with them and willing to risk exposing it. Of course, then she collapses, but that's a whole other conversation. Good laugh, Liv. I think that is an interesting question that, we can talk about. This is going to lead us, Chelsea, I believe, to later on as we grow in this podcast over the season, and when the season is over and we're working on Sharon Raydor in this podcast, and we can reflect on the whole arc of the last season, this idea of the energy of anger and the balancing of our emotions with life and health and stress, and when is it worth it to risk your whole thing? You know what I mean? It's a good question. It's a wonderful thing to be able to watch her now navigate, because I don't think she particularally calms down through the rest of.
I don't think she's ever
She's
going to go back in that controlled box.
No, she's married now. Things are totally out of control. That's what marriage is. You give up the control. You do. That's nobody really talks about it that way, but that's what it is.
Well, going back into marriage and family, we saw some really interesting scenes between Sharon and all of her kids.
Yeah.
Specifically, there's one scene that I want to talk about where Ricky is trying to convince her. He's like, we got to do this, Mom. Let's cut a deal. You like deals. And Sharon's I just have to show up and look pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know. Really.
And I loved seeing Sharon just be like, you should know this by now.
Yeah. Well, talking about the family, Sharon's family. And, every time that Zara and Ryan come on, it was a blast. I really loved the way they were written, the way they were played. I never for a second doubted they were my kids. You know what I mean? That they weren't really Sharon Raydor's kids. They were. And the step sibling thing with Rusty was always so interesting to me. But I thought particularly in this arc, and certainly leading into the wedding, they were just a riot. And you did see people who've known each other for a very long time, like the way Ricky Raydor thinks he understands his mother and the way he tries to manipulate her, I find so charming and funny. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I like that. I like that element was there in this arc. It helped make the whole thing real to me, and that he walked me down the aisle too. That was beautiful. And I know that people were wanting before no one to walk Sharon Raydor down the aisle. I remember reading all that because she was such an independent woman, and I was like, I get that. I really do get that. But that's not what getting married is. It's the opposite.
Well,
do you know what I mean? It's like I'm saying I will give up my lockdown to, and in this case, you're marrying another gender, and there's the There's something, and the bad parts about the patriarchy inside that ritual are the origins of it, which was the woman was given to the man along with her dowry. And that's really ridiculous. But shades of giving up the independence of the woman are there. And it's really interesting because the men don't feel that in general. They feel like they're gaining something. And my mother said the most wonderful thing to me, Liv, your grandma, said the most wonderful thing to me right before my wedding, because of course I was as nervous as anybody you've ever seen. My mother-in-law said I looked like I was divining for water because I had these orchids with vines, and I was shaking so hard that it literally looked like that. So my mother, I remember being on that, because I was out here shooting the The Comedy with Elliot Gould, and Randy was on Broadway. And somewhere in there we had a break and got married in Philly. I mean, that was how we did this. And about a month before I was starting to, and we were doing it with my sister. It was beautifully organized and everything was going to work, and it did. But I was having a bit of a nervous breakdown about it, and I called my mom, and she goes, "What seems to be the problem?" And I said, "I don't know. It's not really the arrangements. I'm not worried that the flowers won't get there or that, the normal bride stuff." She goes, "No, I wouldn't expect that out of you." And she goes, "So what are you worried about?" I said, "Being a wife, being a bride on that day." And she goes, "Well, I'm going to let you in on a secret." I said, "What?" She goes, "Well, the wedding day is not really for the bride." And I said, "What?" And she goes, "Well, the bride has to do all the work. She has to arrange everything. She's got to keep track of all the details. She's got to make sure everything's all right.
Give him something pretty to look at.
Getting something pretty to look at. Make sure the music is picked. And P.S. the bride's father usually pays. And P.S. the groom shows up in a tuxedo. And then there's a little rehearsal dinner that he's responsible for." There's the tradition. So, but commercially, this is my mother telling me all this. That's where they make the money on all the bride's accoutrements. So they make it about the bride's day. Most brides, she said, by the time they get to the wedding, are a nervous wreck. And so I said, "Oh," so she said, "So if I were you, I'd just feel what you feel, see what it feels like, cry if you need to. It's going to be great, but it's not an easy passage." This was your grandmother, right?
Smart lady.
I know.
Words of wisdom.
Words of wisdom. And on that note, I hope you all get married someday, if you're not already. Oh, dear.
Oh, gosh. I feel like that's it, really. We've covered so much ground, and we've even gone back way when we first started this thing with some of the stuff we talked about. Does anyone else? Liv, you're very quiet over there.
Oh, well, I mean, my bit was only 90 seconds, so I'm not like, I don't have much else to say, but thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
It's great to do. I know I hosted one of these things back in the day. I don't even remember how long ago that was, but it's nice to participate again.
Well, there'll be more opportunities, because we plan to grow this thing. We just don't know in what direction post Major Crimes, right? But we do want to keep it going. And, we haven't had the What Would Sharon Raydor Do podcast yet about what's happening in Hollywood. I mean, we have a lot to talk about.
That's another special episode for us.
Yes, and with a lot of guests. And you know what I'm saying? There's so many things that, because, I will say this about this audience, you guys out there, is that I've been reading a lot in the last day about your responses to this season and your responses to the wedding. And I know that there's controversy out there. And because I can't really talk about the whole season yet, so we can't really discuss some of these issues. But I will say that part of why there is so much out there is that, and why I would like to keep this podcast going, why we all want to, and I know Olivia feels that way about it too, is that you all are so smart. And you're demanding a lot out of the culture. And Sharon Raydor is one of your demands because you're smart enough to recognize the potential in her. And we hear you. We hear what you're saying. And I can't respond to all of it yet because I can't reveal spoilers and all kinds of things. But you're not being heard as about what you feel about women and the culture and symbolism and all kinds of things. We've got so many things to talk about in the future. And really, too, what's happening in Hollywood is really, hopefully, the beginning of a giant paradigm shift. But it's going to take continual discussion and identification and clarity. I already feel people slipping back into questions like, yeah, but why? Tell me again why those women didn't speak up in the moment. And, we're sliding back into the comfort zone of saying, well, you know what I mean? Rather than going after the inappropriate cultural signals that are allowing this behavior to foster. And that's going to take a really tough-minded group of citizens to continue to engage in, and I think we have a nice little group here that can kind of push that together a little. So we're looking forward to what would Sharon Raydor do in the future, right? Yeah.
So much.
Okay, so wait a minute. Before we sign off, hold on.
Guys, thank you so much for listening, tuning in, all of your comments. We see them. So this is us signing off. If you have questions, comments, concerns, all that good stuff, please comment on Facebook. You can comment on majorcrimestv.net. You can comment on Twitter using the hashtag WWSRD. If you are on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, please take the time, leave us a review. 5 stars would be greatly appreciated. So yeah. This concludes episode 13 of the What Would Sharon Raydor Do podcast. Mary, Olivia, you guys want to sign us out?
This podcast has been brought to you in part by MajorCrimesTV.net.